Hi, I'm Lori Essig, and I'm a professor here at Middlebury College. And it is March 9th, 2017. And it is my huge pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Olga Lipovskaya.
Mhm. Hi.
And Olga, what I thought we could do today is just have a conversation, a sort of oral history of your life and your activism as a feminist in Russia.
Mhm.
If that's okay. So I'll just
All
ask you
right.
questions and you answer as much as you want, and then maybe tell me things I forgot to ask.
Mhm.
Um, so, Olga, I know you as sort of the grandmother of contemporary feminism in Russia. And I'm wondering when you became a feminist and how that happened. What was the. You weren't born a feminist, I assume. But maybe you were.
Well, yeah, nobody. I think nobody is born a feminist, but as my friend and colleague from Croatia, Georgia Knežević, once said, that you become a feminist out of your personal experience. But not all women become feminists out of their personal experience. So you need to have a background to start thinking what's wrong. I grew up in a family of five girls. I'm the oldest sister, five. Two cousins, they're sisters, but anyway. And I was raised up by a grandmother who was a professional woman who had a high position in the Soviet system and who was a real career woman. And I had this image of also my aunt who divorced her husband and left with two daughters, who also was a professional woman with no, and there were never any stereotypical demands in my family about how I should behave as a girl or what I should do at home, like our grandfather used to cook when grandmother went to business trips, etc. So I didn't have this very normal, stereotypical sort of view of life. And being an older sister of five, I think I was naturally assuming that it's a normal situation for a woman to want to be somebody, to be independent, and certainly not to dream of only getting married and having children.
So, what years was this? What year were you born?
I was born in 1954, and it was like a year after Stalin died. And my parents were both studying in Leningrad then at the universities. That's how they met, how they got married, and I was conceived in Leningrad, but born in the north of Russia, where my mother went to give birth. And our parents divorced quite soon, leaving three daughters behind. So I also didn't have a very uh, normal, straight image of a family, too.
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, divorced parents was sort of, it happens. It's not like mm. But also, I think that also because I have very early memories in my childhood of how my father beats my mother, I was already sort of watchful or careful about male violence. Maybe this is also sort of a coin dropped into my coin bank of feminism.
I like that metaphor. So you have a few coins in. You go off to Leningrad. What year was that? Do you remember?
After I graduated school, I always wanted to go to Leningrad, not to Moscow. Although my mother lived in Moscow and could have probably stayed with her, but I didn't want to. And Leningrad was a place I dreamed of, and I went to study at the university, but I didn't pass the exams. I wanted to study foreign languages, and my next attempt, a year after, I went home. Then I came back, and I went again, tried after that, and I didn't manage to become a student, but I became a hippie. I've traveled by hitchhiking in the Baltic countries. I had friends who traveled with me. They were students, so in summer vacation they would travel, and I stayed at other people's homes. In those times, actually, you could easily stay. People would give you shelter if you have nowhere to live for free, and you could stay with people. And
So this would have been the early 1970s.
72, 73.
And you were traveling on a hippie circuit full time.
No, but like 3, 4 months I would travel.
And how, well, I think what would be surprising to an American listener is at not the height of the Soviet Union, but really in the depths of the Soviet Union and what Americans often imagine as an incredibly controlled society. How could you guys just be hippies for 3 or 4 months a year? How did you?
Well, if we were stopped and arrested sometimes. For example, in Lithuania, Palanga is a resort place for rich people, for rich Soviet tycoons, actually. And when we were walking by the street of Palanga, we were barefoot, wearing these hair bands. I had this butterfly here. And we were stopped by the police and taken to the station. And we were accused of misdemeanor or misbehaving. And like they said, you walk barefoot on the streets, and we have ministers who have vacations here. How dare you, like in front of ministers and their wives, to walk barefoot? But generally, uh, because hippie, as we discussed with you, were not really politically oriented. We were not actually prosecuted or chased or whatever. They did it with dissidents, yes. And of course, I had friends in dissident circles. That's how I first met these proto-feminists from the Women in Russia group.
So proto-feminist from the Women in Russia group, that would have been 1978, 1979?
1978. The group started, I think, in 77 or something, and they produced several issues of their journal, Women in Russia.
And then an English version called Women in Russia that was published here.
Yeah, and after it was published abroad, not only in United States, it was published in France, I think, in Germany too. And after that, they were actually um, called by the KGB. KGB started to pressure them, and there were interrogations. There was one woman, Natalia Lazareva, I think, who actually went to prison. There was another one, Tatiana Grigorieva, who didn't go to prison because she had 5, and she didn't immigrate, but she had 5 children. They didn't dare to put her to jail, but those 3, yes, the feminists raised hell abroad, so they decided it would be easier to send them away, not to.
Now talk to me about, so there's a coin in your coin bank as you meet these women, these 5 women, a couple of whom you've named, or Tatiana Mamonova still, and...
I met later on in after Perestroika. Some of them came to Russia, like Tatiana Goricheva and Natalia Malakhovskaya. I met them later on, and we talked about, like, Natalia. She wanted, for example, we organized our center in mid-90s. We organized a sort of a session of her reading for our audience of the Gender Center. But in my opinion, she just writes in fiction with well, maybe it's her vision of female power, whatever. But it's a lot of mystical stuff and a lot of fairy tale figures like Rusalka, mermaid, or Baba Yaga. I don't know how to say Baba Yaga in English.
I think we just say Baba Yaga.
Yeah, Baba Yaga. And her feelings about being a woman, etc. But there was not an obsessed feminist sort of message from it.
So meaning that, so these women who were around in 1979 in Leningrad, who were in Moscow, who were taking pressure, but they were just in Leningrad.
Actually, it was a Leningrad group, right?
Yeah, they were just in Leningrad, so they were taking pressure from the KGB. They were being marked as dissidents, but their message, you're saying, wasn't feminist in that they didn't have any contact with other feminists, right? It was just woman-centered.
Yeah.
That's why you're using the term.
Yeah.
But you still have a coin or 2 or 5 in your feminist coin bank. So by now, are you identifying as a feminist? 1979, 1980?
Earlier, in 1976 probably, I started to write notes because I've already had enough experience with the opposite sex, and I always felt this contradiction between the way they treated me and I perceived myself. Like I thought I was an equal human being, etc., and they would sort of expect from me something else, including some experience with rape and violence. I was too naive and open provincial girl, quite attractive as I realize now. Become not attractive anymore.
Yes, you
But really, I started to think and I started to write without any access to feminist thinking or books or whatever. 75, I think. Started to write these notes, which I titled as like inferiority complex of a Soviet man.
Mhm.
Or just a complex of a Soviet man, and just writing my notes and thinking like, what's the matter with them, blah blah blah. So I started to think, what's going on? Why men in Russia are so demanding, so depending, and on the other hand, they want to control you.
Mhm.
And it's like, you know, there is not enough responsibility. Russian men, I don't want to generalize, but Soviet men and Russian men are hardly responsible fathers. They are demanding husbands, and there was a normal practice, for example, for especially working class families, when a woman would so wait for her husband outside of his factory or whatever job place to take his salary at salary day, which is twice a month, because otherwise he would drink it off, or he would sort of hide some part of the salary to drink on it, and a lot of things like that. So, also considering this after Second World War, so many women and so few men. Like my grandmother, she was an yes a role model for me. She managed after the Second World War to find an wounded and injured man to marry uh, easily, because there was huge shortage of men and a lot of women stayed alone to the end of their lives without finding a husband, and he was always, like we say, под каблуком. It's he was always sort of inferior to her.
Yeah.
She
Under
was
the heel.
she was under the heel, yes. So in many ways, I think that is also again part of my concept of the world. You asked me.
So you started making these notes in 1976 or so. The complex of the Soviet man. At what point did you connect these personal problems to the larger social issues of sexism or patriarchy?
Oh, very interesting. I had, since I didn't have any serious position, didn't have a vulnerable. I was not a Soviet student. I never had proper, real jobs with good salaries, etc. I made friends with foreign students, postgraduate students, uh, through actually my circle of musicians and artists, etc. And one of these people has brought me a book, gave me a book which is titled Sweet Freedom, written by two British feminists, uh, Bell Hoods and Beatrice Campbell. And it was called Sweet Freedom and described, and I think it's like mid 80s, 84, 82, something like that, or early 80s. And I read this book, and it was describing the leftist feminist movement in England and Britain with Thatcherism, etc. And I thought, wow. So, and of course, there were concepts of feminism and a bit of theory and ideas, and I thought, wow, this is what I share. This is what I understand. And later on, other books arrived from my other friends, and I also met one very interesting feminist from England. She was in our team, in our group of rock musicians, already famous ones like Aquarium, baguette, etc. And she was wearing a sweatshirt, uh, which was had its like an ornament, and it was saying, "When God created man, she was only joking." And he said, "And who is she?" She said, "God, of course." And she took it off and gave it to me, and I started to wear it proudly because it was great. It was a great idea. And she also impressed me because one of our, sort of one man, he was sort of a pretentious guy who would kiss women's hands. And so he did it to her and she did it back. And I was so embarrassed and I liked it so much.
And so, what year was this? Do you remember what year this was?
I think it was 1985, 86.
So, when did you start Women's Reader, which was your
Women's reading.
women's reading?
Женское чтение.
Yeah.
How to, well, could be reader anyway. I started it in 1987.
So this was like 84, 85. You met a feminist.
Yes.
You had some sense, and then you say to yourself, "You know what I'm going to do? It's Soviet times. I'm going to start a Samizdat journal." So talk to me about that process. What got you?
Samizdat journal, because in Leningrad then we had this club which was called Club 81 of Samizdat publishers, writers, etc. Why it was called Club 81? Because when Andropov came to power, became a KGB head in Soviet Union, he decided that some dissidents, like intellectual dissidents, you don't need to put them to prison, you just need to control them.
Mm-hmm.
To curator's job, you know. So they allowed these kind of clubs to exist and would sort of watch them through their agents or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when these people would organize something too inappropriate stuff, like there was a play they wanted to stage with Gorokhin. Gorokhin was an avant-garde musician in Leningrad. Idiot by Dostoevsky, but with very serious hints to Soviet stuff, etc. The Russian consul, American, a guy from American consulate was there at this performance. The KGB rushed in and they stopped the play, etc. But otherwise, they would control it. And some of my friends produced journals of different stuff. And one of them, who published a journal called Predlog, which is grammatic, like off, on, preposition, and also the predlog is also sort of an excuse for doing something. And it was translations. And he asked me to translate some, who's that? Some women's stuff, some American writer. I forgot the name. Anyway, it was my first attempt. So he helped me to understand that I can translate. Because my English was well developed due to communicating with people and having some boyfriends, native speakers, so English. And so it was my first attempt, not really brilliant, but not bad, in translation. And then I thought, wow, I can produce my own journal.
Okay.
And this club has meetings like once in a while. Sometimes they were reading their new production to each other. They discussed it, etc. So, and at that point, I had a friend from California, Julie Dorff. She's a gay activist, but also at that point, what she was doing. She was helping families to adopt children from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So Julie introduced me to these two journalists from the Washington Times. And I shared with Julie my idea to produce my own journal. So they interviewed me, and I told about this journal, blah, blah. And then Julie later on, she showed me this article. So it was the last point where I had to start it. So yes. I started to produce it. And it was funny because I had to type it on a typewriter with very thin paper. And it's like end of 87. I asked one woman artist, to make logo, for my title, Women's Reading. And of course, 5 copies could be read, but the rest was.
So when you were typing, did you have Xerox paper? Did you have copy paper in between?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Black.
Because there were no copy machines.
Carbon paper.
Yeah,
No, there were no. There were copy machines, but you
That you had
didn't have
access
access
to.
to them. It was absolutely added. So it's yeah, and even illustrations for the first issue. Or a friend of mine who was a graphic artist, but also an actress. She made 10 copies of each illustration for me. And but later on, yes, I did not do much illustration. Many of the illustrations I did the writing, and it was like translation of a book. What do we want by two psychoanalytics, British feminist psychoanalytics, and then some stuff like I translated some articles from linguistic journals. I remember this article, I liked it, and it was about singles bars slang. So interesting. Uh, um, I published articles of people, like a friend of mine had written an article for me, she's a linguist, about uh, gender divisions in language, in different languages, this kind of stuff. And poetry of women who have been forgotten, and uh, poetry by Sophia Parkman, by the way, who was a lover of Maria Tsvetaeva. Maria Tsvetaeva, which was not well known, like lesbian poetry. Actually, my fifth issue was dedicated to lesbian topic. You know, there were memoirs and stories by some lesbian women and Sophia Parkman, etc.
Do you remember the reaction, the Zhinsky Chitanian to women's readings? Do you remember reading? Do you remember like people being like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" Or were they like, "This is pretty exciting"? And
First reaction when I introduced it to this Club 81, and those men, and you, many of them, quite on friendly terms. They said, "Well, it's interesting."
Mm-hmm.
Then I'd given it to some of my friends, they gave it to friends, and that's how, for example, Natalia Khodeva came to me. She saw this journal and she found me somehow. But most of the reaction was from the Western women who I think that someone has taken some of the copies to United States or somewhere. Yes, I think to United States, and maybe it was shown to some other people.
And maybe I'm misremembering, but wasn't there a place where they would sometimes sell them in Leningrad back then?
No, I never sold them. It's like 6 copies. How much
maybe
money can you make of that? Maybe somebody would sell them. I wouldn't. I would just give them away to people.
And did you get any pushback from the KGB? Did anyone say to you?
No, nobody cared really.
So that was 1987. You did how many issues?
Within this, because I also was quite active in opposition party and political.
Well, that's what I was. Yeah, I wanted you to talk
about
the Democratic Union. Yeah.
Yes.
Which might be
so
what we had.
It was like parallel, and I also didn't get any response to my feminist ideas within the Democratic Union.
So talk to me about what the Democratic Union was, so that people listen to this.
It's very interesting. It was initiated by a group of sort of philosophers and thinkers and dissidents who initially they were a group who called themselves the Friendship Alliance with the United States, something like that. They did stuff like they did questionnaires for the Russian people to find out how much they know about the United States, and there were funny answers, blah, blah, blah. So they wanted to inform more, and they perceived the United States as a kind of democracy. Actually, Katya Podoltseva, who was one of the leaders of this organization, she is living in Boston now, in the cradle of democracy.
Yes.
So yes, and then when Perestroika started and parties started to organize, they decided to call it Democratic Union, and Katya and Lera Novodvorskaya, who died a couple of years ago, were the basic philosophical background for this, and they'd written the statute of this party, the demands, and the demands among the demands were we were the most actually the most radical, the most oppositional. We were
You
border
certainly
of
have the
opposition.
KGB's attention.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
The KGB was attentive to that, and Petersburg, Leningrad Democratic Union Organization was the last one with an open case with this KGB Soviet article of penal code number 70. It is distributing false information about Russian, Soviet Union and about Soviet political system and blah blah blah. And there were searches in houses, there were arrests, there were interrogations. Unfortunately, I wasn't afraid at all.
I was just going to ask, were you afraid? You had a young daughter at the
Because
time?
I had in the
son?
past.
Yeah.
Yes, I had in the past, in like 1981 or two, I had already the encounter with the KGB because some of my friends, the British guy, was sort of Sovietologist whom they watched quite attentively. And also, I visited him in Moscow, but also next night I went with with guys from French embassy to the Marine ball in American embassy. On Fridays they organized these balls for Marines because they were not allowed to go out. So I passed through with this French crowd of French people. So when they one day, 1980, let me see, two, I think three, because my son was supposed to go to school. They called me at work and said, "Well, come over. This is KGB. We want to talk to you." And I came, and they asked me, "Have I ever?" They started with, first of all, he offered me Marlboro cigarettes.
Which in that day were a very
Absolutely,
rare commodity.
yes.
Soviet cigarettes were quite harsh,
Yeah.
as I recall.
Yeah. And then he asked me if I ever been at the territorial American embassy. I said no. He said, "But we have video materials and blah 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 and photographs. Would you like to see them?" I said, "Okay, yes, I was. This is a crime." And he said, like, "Oh, no, but there are spies and blah 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 and the spy." And then he just, I think they wanted because I think they watched me and I think they found out that I have a lot of friends from the West and I am very communicable and blah blah. So the suggestion, the offer was, if I could meet foreign people, they would show me and sort of establish a relationship with them and blah blah blah. I said, "No, I can't." "Why? They are spying on us." And you, I said, "Because I was taught since my childhood that I shouldn't read other people's letters." "Yeah, but they do." I said, "Okay, that's your job, not mine." And then, of course, he said, "Okay." Somehow I didn't know. I didn't know much about dissidents' tactics, how to behave with the KGB. It was my initial reaction. Why I should be afraid? So I said, "Okay, I can do it, and I won't do it." And when he asked me, "And who are your friends actually?" I somehow didn't give any name. I don't know why. I said like it could be musicians or artists or простые советские инженеры, simple Russian engineers, no names. And when I was leaving, he said, "Okay, and I would ask you not to tell anyone about our meeting." I was so concerned when I went inside that somebody of people who know me would see me coming in and what they would say. Awful. So as soon as I came home, and it's KGB headquarters, and my place is very close, I dialed from my phone number. I dialed the French embassy guy, and I said, "Oh, you know what's happened? I was invited to KGB to interrogate. Remember, you took me to the embassy, blah blah blah." I did it deliberately. I somehow felt that if you do it, if you publicize it, they would hardly do anything bad to you. My only concern was they wouldn't allow my son to go to this special school where they study English, advanced English studies, and I had a right to do that, to put him in that school. because I worked in the education department of my district. But I thought they would sort of might. So I decided like to publicize it as much as possible for them not to be able to control me.
That's great.
So when next time they invited me for interrogation, they came actually to my flat and took me. Police. The KGB and police were always sort of rivals. They didn't like each other. So KGB made police to take people and to bring it to them. So local police officer who knew me because hippies like he came to my place and he took me. He said, "Okay, you should go." I said, "No, I won't." And he said, "We will have to do some. We don't want to use force." So I went. I went, and when I came, the policeman, when he brought me to this officer sitting outside of the doors, and there's some on duty, officer on duty. Policeman deliberately told me like goodbye in front of the KGB, like saying, shown respect in front of this KGB guy. So the KGB guy came to me and started. At that point, I was already quite informed. So when the KGB guy was walking upstairs in front of me, he like talking back to me said, "Oh, do you like it here? Maybe you've been here before." And I just didn't say anything. And I know how embarrassing it is when you say something and you don't get a reply.
Mm-hmm.
And then this guy brought me to his small, very narrow, like he was sort of a secondary stuff. And it was also obvious for me, very narrow sort of office with a typewriter in the corner. And when you enter, at the very door, there's this low table, maybe a bit higher, and a very low metal chair, low, and it's screwed into the floor, so you can move it. And walking forward, not looking at me, he said, "Well, please sit down," assuming that I will sit down there. "I'm sorry." And there were a row of chairs like this here, and I walked around and I sat on the chair. And in front of me, there was a portrait of Lenin on the wall. And the wall was painted like this, lower part dark, and Lenin was sort of a bit perikoshin, a bit straight.
Yeah, crooked.
Yeah. And the guy started to ask me name, my last name. I said, "You know all that, all that." And he was like trying to dig any information out of me. And I was saying, "No comments, I won't answer, blah, blah, blah." And finally I said, "And your Lenin is sort of not straight, doesn't hang straight." And he was so irritated. He said, "The fuck with him. Oh, whatever." Then he got himself, "It's good that he is there." That's it. And the story ended with nothing. And finally, all this case opened against the Russian, the Leningrad Democratic Union was closed. Next time they got me to bring to the local KGB headquarters, which is the corner of Fontanka and Nevsky, Dvorец Белосельский. Now there is a Museum of Democracy of Sobchak or whatever. And they brought me there, and it's the first time I got to do this place because it was Komsomol, KGB, and Communist Party headquarters of the district.
And it's a beautiful building. So
It's a beautiful building. And when I told Richard Stites about this building, I said, "This is Komsomol, KGB, and Communist Party." He said, "Ku Klux Klan." KKK. So they invited me, and they wanted me to sign a paper that the case is closing. So I should sign some paper for them closing the case. So as if I agreed that the case was open, etc. I said, "No, I'm not signing anything. Not me." So they had to close it in a year's time. And I knew already. They also had a lot of contacts abroad. I worked then already as a fixer for Western TV or journalists
Right, so you knew it would be a scandal if they
Well,
arrested
at
you.
least I knew that there would be too much bother for them to.
So what was the year that the last encounter with the KGB happened?
It was 1989.
So 1989, so the end is near.
Yes, it was the last case of the KGB political crime, which was closed, and later on, perestroika was really going on.
So it's the 1990s now. What are you doing in the 1990s?
In the 1990s, I met this, I think in 91 or 2, a woman from German department at the university called me. They found me and she wanted people to meet with. She wanted to meet to feminists, to Russian feminists, to meet with the German delegation of feminists and lesbian women. Uh, at that point, I already knew some other, like Olga, some other active feminists, and so we met with them in a very dark and really poor hotel, Sovietsky, which is like 91, 92, real poor at that point. And we had a very interesting conversation. For example, one of our Russian women, she was sort of very keen on the question of paid women's paid domestic labor. And the German feminist said, but that means that you relegate yourself to, like you accept that it's your job, that you should do that. So we had a very interesting discussion, and they got interested. Heidi, uh, who's dead now, but Heidi was really interested, and so we made an appointment to meet next day. But what I like about this meeting also, they gave all of us like little boxes with some presents. And when I came home and opened this box, what I found inside, a big piece of lavender soap. Why? At that point there were shortages of normal good soap. But I felt really uneasy. I mean,
You felt it was insulting.
yes. But they, I think, I understood later, I think they thought it was like a sisterly, friendly present. So,
But you had some encounters with Western feminists where you not only maybe disagreed on what you needed as feminists, but where there was a kind of. I remember you being at a conference in California. I can't remember what the conference was, but they basically told the Russians that Americans like to shower every day. You remember this, right? That there was a kind of. I guess what I'm asking you is, did you find as you began to encounter more and more Western activists and feminists that there was also kind of a colonial relationship to the Russian feminists, or no? Did you find it just
well, actually, you're right, and you remind me about another story. In 1991, in August, I was invited to speak at the conference at the conference in Aalborg, Denmark, and it was called "Women in a Change in Europe." And the text I was preparing for that was titled uh, "Cousins or Sisters." Is there really a sisterhood? And I described some of the attitudes. At that point, I already met quite a few feminists from the West, different kinds. Uh, and I had this sort of contemplation about uh, how we sometimes cannot understand each other because, for example, the concept of left and right in Russia is totally upside down, and at some points it's hard for Western feminists to understand the reality of women's life in Russia. To understand what I told about today, that there is no continuity in civil dignity in Russia. That people never had enough period of uh, taking their own civil rights as a norm. It never was a period in Russia.
or even the way what I remember about that time is women didn't even have access. I mean, forget birth control and tampons. I mean, people were still using rags and cotton.
Yeah,
These sort of basic products that give women dignity and the ability to go to work
yeah.
weren't there. There wasn't, as you know, there were
Not
even
speaking
things like
about
a friend with like breast
domestic
cancer.
supply, like the domestic equipment, like no proper washing machines, of
Right.
course, and
Or even a vacuum back then.
yeah, and shopping, always in queues and lines,
Right.
and for scarce products, like if you, I remember how I spent an hour and a half because I really wanted to buy this jar of Bulgarian tomatoes.
Hmm.
Uh, and after an hour and a half, they were finished.
Right. So feminists here in the West or in the U.S. we're talking about the second shift that women perform. They go to work and then they go to the grocery store and they do the laundry. But women in Russia were doing a third and a fourth shift, right?
Yeah.
Because of the amount of time. And even so, just weren't the goods. So that must have been, it must have been difficult to find sisterhood when your lived experiences, at least with the feminists you were dealing with, were probably radically different.
Yeah, yeah, but also some of the feminists I met were either leftists, like Beatrix Campbell, and I met her later, and I didn't know it was her. She came in 1989 with a friend, and they were doing a film about changing attitudes to sexuality. And only the second day, because she introduced herself as Mary Barnes, I understood that she's a B. Campbell, the one who wrote all this, and she's a leftist, and she's coming from the northern part of England, from the miners' family. And she really said that she uh, broke in a relation with her father, who was still a communist and a Stalinist, and she, like, seeing the perestroika, she changed her mind and had different views. Anyway, so some of the feminists, or those who did Slavic studies, who knew much more about our reality, would understand things. I would share. So for me, it was not like, oh, you're a Western, you don't know how we live. No, but different. Some, like upper class. There was this woman who wrote about me in the book Walking the Tightrope. I don't remember her name. Her name is French.
It's
Duplessis Gray.
Yeah.
Oh,
Francine, yeah.
Francine Duplessis Gray. Okay. When I saw how she described all the stuff, and I felt like, okay. She also described me as a tall, dark-haired woman, which I was not at all.
I don't remember you being tall or dark-haired.
I think she confused some stuff in her mind, but anyway. So there were different encounters and different women, and but still, what I was interested in is the theory. Like,
right, that's my question. Could you translate the theory into things that made sense in your life? And if so, which theories?
First books I read were like more or less theoretic. It's like this the book I translated, What Do Women Want by Susie Orbach and Louise Eichenbaum. And it was easy to understand because they were doing this analysis on the basis of their cases when they did like therapy for women. What else I read then? Oh, Simone de Beauvoir, of course, The Second Sex. Richard Stiles, Women's Liberation, Women's Liberation Movement in Russia.
Which gave you a historical context for what
yes.
had been
of
Russian feminisms that had been made to disappear during the Stalin and post-Stalin.
Yeah. What else? I mean, then the books were coming, and I read one after another. I don't.
And you were becoming, and any Russians were becoming much more global citizens too, because suddenly they were traveling.
Yeah. And I traveled a lot, and somehow, yes, we were popular then. I remember being invited to the United States by Bella Abzug, which was a brilliant story. It was also 1889, I think. Hunter College conference. Like international World Women's Conference, which goes every 3 years. Since the one in Australia was in '96, I think it was in '89 even. Like that. Yes, '89. And that's where I met these women from East Germany, from Hungary, from first time women from Eastern Europe,
Mm-hmm.
Eastern and Central Europe, because Bella was organizing this East European panel, and she impressed me herself. I mean, she was brilliant. What a woman! What a performance!
Yeah.
She came on stage like an old sort of tired woman like that, and she started to talk. And then she drew off her hat and threw it away. Then she took off her jacket and started to speak like fire. It was really impressive. That's, again, an image you follow.
And what was it like to realize that there were feminist movements happening all over Eastern Europe, but there wasn't quite a way to communicate with each other yet? Were you excited? Were there ways to keep those connections going? Who
Uh,
were you communicating with the most in the 90s?
yeah, we will communicate quite closely. Thanks to this, first of all, the Frauenstiftung Foundation, which supported from our Center for Gender Issues, from the very beginning. They also had a lot of projects in Eastern European countries. So we were meeting, regular meetings, different conferences in different countries. It could be Berlin, it could be Croatia, it could be uh, Istanbul, whatever.
So the Center for Gender Issues was started in part with the help from the German
Yes.
organization in 1990.
Actually, I started it in 1993 in October, when funding was not granted yet, but they paid me 5,000 Deutschmark for a research study I did for them, because before to start the project they needed to do a research about the possibility of opening any kind of educational feminist center in Petersburg. Mm-hmm. So I studied NGOs, I studied state structures, university, um, um, like sociological faculty and blah blah blah. And I did analysis of all the independent press of women's organizations at that point. Mm-hmm. And I wrote this, and so they paid me, and on this money, because one of my friends already who were going to organize a center together had found a place, mm-hmm. which we could rent. So I spent my own money to rent it, risking sort of losing it if funding wouldn't come. But still, it was enough money to start. And only in April next year, it was proved, and we got first tranche of the money from the foundation. And actually, it was brought in cash. I used to smuggle it through the border in my shoes, like 40,000 Deutschmark.
It was very difficult to get. It's like you could do a bank transfer.
Yeah, and it was like I signed a paper in Berlin and in Hamburg. They were located in Hamburg, and I would fly to Petersburg, to Leningrad, and I would walk out with money in my shoes.
So the center existed from what year? From 1990?
93, end of 93 to the beginning of 2004.
Right, so a long time. And tell me about the work you guys did.
Oh, there was a lot of work. We started with a series of seminars and lectures, and I very well remember who was the first lecturer. It was a postgraduate student, German student, Britta Schmidt, who told us the story about how the modern feminism in Germany developed. They started actually with abortions. Then we found other specialists like sociologists, blah, blah, blah. So we tried to do the one seminar a week at least. Then we had a library, which was mostly out of my collection of books. And there were a lot of in English, packs of Ms. magazine or Spare Rib magazines, but also some stuff in Russian. And there was Женское чтение, of course. And there was so we had this big space for a library where we also had seminars, and we did produce an almanac, a journal. Mm-hmm. First, it was like twice a year, and one of us, Lena Zabadikin, she suggested the name Old Lena Sisters, mm-hmm. and actually she got it from me because there was this guy who did co-counseling from the United States, Jeremy Jenkins, I think his name was. who first said "All men are sisters," and he used to wear like beads, and he was a fun guy. He preached in Russia. And my sister and my ex-husband, number three, they all were involved in this activity, learning this. Co-counseling is like how you get rid of distress in your life. Okay. Anyway, all men are sisters. So все люди сестры in Russian. Not men, but humans in Russian. But it sort of gives sort of this practical shift from все люди братья. All in Russian there is a saying, all human beings are brothers, and we said, no, all people are sisters, and that's it. So we started to publish this journal, which was like. What did we publish there? I don't remember the first issue even, and it was so. Yeah, it was big, quite badly printed, and I ordered it to the guy who I knew from the Democratic Union, but he was a crook. He actually also borrowed from me like a big sum of money and never returned it. So and produced this really shabby and bad-looking journal, first issue. Later on, we produced much better ones, and there were the one was dedicated to my favorite project, which was a festival of women's art in 1994. We managed, in those times it was easy. We managed to rent a huge space from the Soviet Artists Union on Gersten Street, on the Большая Морская today. And they even tried at the very end, and we had signed a contract, and they tried to move us to a smaller space, saying like there is a exhibition from Uzbekistan coming, so could you move? I said no, we had a contract and we paid for it, and we organized this festival. There were 20 women artists in a huge hall on the walls, and the way the artists were selected, we didn't select them. We called the exhibition Favoritka, which is a favorite one, because the first 5 people appointed, a couple of artists, us, who organized it, they appointed their favorite artist, and those in their turn. So that's how they came 20 artists of different ages, different schools, different techniques, whatever. Very interesting. And there were women dancers and women singers and women reading poetry about.
So you were doing cultural things like women's art.
That's what I love.
You were doing this newsletter that gave a lot of different sorts of information. You were doing skills classes for women, like computers were really new.
Computer,
English classes. Were you talking explicitly to when people came in for a computer class, or were you talking explicitly about feminism and how did that go?
No, but we were at the first class when they came. We were telling them about our center. What do we do? We call ourselves feminists, and we also gave them at that point we already produced a newsletter, Посиделки, which was a monthly newsletter. And it was much better it was colored sometimes, and it had a good cover, and we introduced humor there, and there was special issues dedicated like for the 23rd of February, it's the Day of Soldiers, Day of Russian military. So we introduced there very interesting stories about how men are humiliated in Russian military, and about the culture of Russian military barracks, etc., etc. So we would give them. Sometimes their husbands would come to pick them up and to watch, like suspiciously, what's going on here.
Do you remember how people felt about the 1990s? How did people feel about the word feminism or feminist?
Always bad. Always bad. When I applied for the catalogue of this exhibition of women's art, I applied to Soros Foundation. And some of the artists I knew were in this selection committee, approving committee for the grant. And I publicly announced when I applied for this grant that I will write for support letters for all my friends, scholars abroad, to support this, to send to Soros to support me. So they had to give it to me. But I heard from the secretary when they approved my grant for publication of catalog that there were serious heated discussions where they said, "Why women?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said to her, "And why not? Why not women?" It's like, who defines art by gender? Blah, blah, blah. We do. Why not? So, and I knew, and some of my friends from these artistic circles, etc., stopped really talking to me. They'd say hello and walk away, and I understood that it was like because
You
of
were
that.
pollution.
Yes.
You would pollute
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Feminism.
And like some husbands of my women friends even hated me, as I found out later. I never noticed such things, but I was told, like, this demon, he hates you because you sort of uh, teach his wife wrong things or whatever.
So, do you think things were more or less sexist in the '90s versus the 1980s? Let's say was there any opening up of gender roles? Because so many things were up for grabs in the 1990s in Russia. One system had collapsed, the new regime had not yet been put into place. Was there any openness during that time, or more openness towards maybe rethinking gender, or not so much?
Not so much until, how to say, until 94 or 5, I don't remember exactly, when, first of all, I think it was 94 when Yeltsin, uh, not Yeltsin, but the government allowed gender studies at schools, at universities.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the first step for scholars to elaborate on the issue first. And then after Beijing plus 5, Beijing conference, the official delegation had to do at least some sort of, at least lip service to the platform for action. So
right,
Yeltsin,
women's
yes,
rights or human
yes.
rights, for instance.
Yeltsin before the elections of '96 even sort of organized a group where he invited Masha Arbatova, our sort of official feminist, into this group with a group of sociologists to work out some women's program.
Mm-hmm.
So he was, but I think Yeltsin did it on one hand because they had to show any reaction to Beijing. And also at that point, Yeltsin was really scared of competition with the communist leader Zyuganov, so he wanted to win. And at those elections, there were a lot of manipulation going on, and press was supporting Yeltsin, and everybody, all my intellectual friends were scared that Yeltsin will not be elected. I agitated them for position, neither of candidates, so nobody. And they said, no, you take votes from Yeltsin. I never liked Yeltsin, actually. And I wanted to be honest with my position, political position. Anyway, but in the society, I wouldn't say, speaking about sexism as a reaction of the society, no, I wouldn't say there is a difference. There is just a difference in the form. For example, starting with the early '90s, there were a lot of real male magazines published, like equivalent to what's called Cutler or Playboy, right. Blah blah, like Medved, journals for men, with women sort of depicted as bodies, and more and more, and there were also the other part in the market in the publishing market, like magazines for women, like Glamour, like Cosmopolitan, but also women's magazines in Russian, like Lisa, Natalie, blah blah, about how to cook good dish out of stale bread, blah blah blah. I'm kidding, it's Soviet style, yeah. Anyway, so. But general attitudes were not changing until very recently, when
Okay, so talk to me about that. So the 2000s happened.
Mm-hmm.
Putin, Medvedev, Putin. What happened recently to change attitudes?
Because they started to push too hard on these traditional values, the Orthodox Church values, and I think that Patriarch Kirill Gundyaev did a big mistake when a couple of months ago he again, but in a more strict form, he suggested to ban abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately the wave, like in the internet and the journalists and everybody started to throw. Uh, and I actually wanted this legislative action to go further, like to be at least once discussed in the parliament, because I wanted Russian women to solidarize, because they have their right for abortion and we will never give it away. Of course, there is more sexual education, there is more access to contraceptives, blah blah blah. But we
There's
still
the
have
internet.
a
There's
lot of
travel.
ignorant women who don't know. And the idea was like to ban it at all. Then next day, I think he was sort of put down from the Kremlin because there is a serious and strong alliance between the Kremlin and the Orthodox Church. But he the next day he said, "No, no, I didn't want to ban it entirely, just to remove it from the from the health insurance system."
Mm-hmm.
And still, the discussion went on, and people said, like, middle class people with more or less normal income would go and have abortion in the clinics, but you deprive poor, ignorant, uneducated teenage women to access to free abortion, and there will be more criminal abortions because still there is a lot of mythology about it, how you can have an abortion. So the Kremlin put him down, hushed down the issue.
So now, why was that the issue and not the domestic violence law that did in fact pass last month? That I think now says you can have, unless you
Yeah,
seriously
yeah,
hurt someone, you
yeah,
only get a fine, right?
yeah, yeah. The domestic violence matter is also very interesting because the Association of Crisis Centers, since like '95, was pushing and pushing and trying to lobby, having contacts with the women's parties which existed at those times, to offer this legislative bill on, especially on domestic violence, just like separate domestic violence legislation, and they never succeeded. It was like they offered several like bill drafts, and they were put aside. They were not like totally rejected. No, but they were like, and then now we have just the turn in the other in absolutely opposite direction, like domestic violence. And the church also says like a wife should be obedient to her husband. So these little slaps, presumably the law was accepted because before that, halfway a year ago, they decriminalized an insult as physical insult to strangers.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, okay, we won't put to prison strangers hitting each other, but we will put relatives. We'll make them go to jail because if they, well, whatever happens in the family, it's a family matter, blah blah. So even before being adopted, the journalists were yelling that it's terrible, specialists in health, specialists in social services. All experts were saying that in Russia, if the law is accepted, it means that you are free to do whatever you want. It's like this law on offending the feelings of believers. It's not like many people were put to jail for that, but now they do terrible acts of vandalism, hurting children, like sprinkling some colored stuff, Zilonka on children, or putting urine on pictures in the exhibitions, which is considered insulting for their religion. I mean, they go to the exhibition space and just put urine on the.
No, so who's doing that? People who are specifically trying to offend religious sensibility, or
Who is doing this?
who's putting urine on
Those people who are
who are
hurt,
believers?
whose religion is hurt.
I see. I'm a believer. I don't like this picture.
Yeah.
Now I will throw.
So I need to go to the exhibition, not
Right.
to like it, and to.
But
This
what-
is the outcome of this law.
Right. Very broad law. maybe.
Yes, and very, very strong and aggressive religious community. But they are not. They are not the religious community. They are sort of deliberately established groups to put the all the different opinions, even in art, in cinema, in culture, down by this force.
But what's weird, Olga, is I hear you saying things are pretty bad. Things may be worse now than they've been in
They
your
are,
lifetime.
not maybe, but
yeah,
sure.
yeah. And yet you feel somewhat hopeful that it's almost having a backlash among people. That people are sort of saying, wait, what? Right? Is that what's happening? I mean, are things going to possibly get better because things have gotten so bad? You're not being optimistic on me, are you?
No, I'm not.
Things only get worse.
I'm not. I think, what is my view, that future is absolutely unclear, but
Mhm.
my fears are that it's more possible that the outcome will be violent.
Mhm.
Because there is a huge gap between the authorities, between the government and the people. And the gap is growing, and there is no informational exchange, and there is only propaganda working on the minds of people. And we have this funny saying recently that there is a struggle between the TV set and refrigerator. And while now the TV set is winning, but at a certain point, refrigerator will tell you, "Wow, there's no more food, there's no more money." How long you will be sort of watching TV and hating the Ukrainians and the Obama and the US, etc., and all the Western enemy, immoral, gay, Europa, etc.
Mhm.
No, sometime. But the problem is that if it's suppressed for so long, and with no really experience of good networking, social activity, public political activity, it may burst out in real unrest. And since the government Putin has built a lot of strong structures, the so-called siloviki, the power structure, the controlling police, whatever structures, are growing. Now the new body is established, which is called the Russian Guard, not like National Guard in the United States. And they have exclusive rights to shoot in the crowd if the crowd becomes dangerous, including children and women.
So what will we tell feminists to do? What will we say to feminists? Will we say, what are feminists doing? What are feminists in Russia doing? What could do you have any advice to them, to your future?
No, I think they're doing okay. I think first of all, they are much more intelligent and informed, like intersectional feminism or like queer feminism, blah, blah, blah. They already are much solidarized with the LGBT movement. They finally understood that they both sort of that gender plays a crucial role in their problems, and so and they're now. I mean, they are sort of dispersed in small groups, but they are in different regions and different countries like Ukraine and Belarus and Russia are very much communicating on this queer and gay and feminist issues. Organizing different events, summer camps, festivals, film shows, etc. So it's like, and I think that they are the feminists and LGBT communities are the most civilized movements because they are very much learning from the Western tactics and strategies. And in the West, at least in this sense, the West is much more advanced in organizing public activity, political activity. So they are quite, and they, you see, they go out and they do creative, interesting stuff, or like this Tintoresca, or it's called this picture with the face.
Like a cutout
Yeah,
picture. Yeah.
I think it's called like not Tintoresca, but Tantaresca or something like that. Still, they do creative stuff. They organize. And there is a lot of men participating in the feminist actions against violence, etc., against rape and birth rights, etc. So I think they're doing okay. The only thing which we need to do is to establish continuity, which was always broken, as I said. I didn't point it today, but like first it was broken after the revolution because it was decided that the socialist, communist party and socialists will solve all the problems. Then in this women in Russia point, they left and everything went down. They never send the message to my generation, say or younger people. And now these young women, we also have this feminist library, Feminfoteka, where they have books, but they also organize discussions every week. It's called Feministskaya Sreda, which means Wednesday and environment. Uh, they invited me a couple of times to tell the story. First one was about feminism in general, like history of feminism in the West and in Russia, and the other one was about what was going on, like similar lecture in this one. And I suggested that if they want, I can do a series of lectures about women's development of women's issues from ancient times to nowadays.
So there, yeah. So everything's gonna go to hell because of,
I'm afraid.
because of the political situation, and yet feminism is thriving in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I think
something.
so. Yeah.
That's a contradictory ending, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you feel like you would want to?
Oh no, I think we've done a lot of talking, right?
All right. Hello to the future feminists out there. When you're doing research, you can thank Olga Vypolskaya for this wonderful interview. Bye.
Yes.